I waited until her gaze fell on Rainer's body before I put my hand over her mouth. We went through all the usual exchanges dictated by Hollywood and polite society. She tried to scream and bite the palm of my hand, and I told her to be quiet because I wasn't going to hurt her unless she shouted. She shouted and I hurt her. Pretty standard stuff, really. By and by, she was sitting on the hideous sofa with half a pint of what I thought was brandy, but turned out to be Calvados, and I was standing by the door wearing my smartest and best, I am psychiatrically A1 expression. I'd rolled Rainer onto his side into a kind of recovery position to stop him from choking on his own vomit, or anyone else's if it came to that. She'd wanted to get up and fiddle with him to see if he was all right. Pillows, damp clothes, bandages, all the things that helped to make the bystander feel better. But I told her to stay where she was because I'd already called an ambulance, and all in all, it would be better to leave him alone. She had started to tremble slightly. It started in the hands as they clutched the glass, then moved to her elbows and up to her shoulders, and it got worse every time she looked at Rainer. Of course, trembling is probably not an uncommon reaction to discovering a mixture of dead person and vomit on your carpet in the middle of the night, but I didn't want her getting any worse. As I lit a cigarette with the alabaster lighter, and yes, even the flame was hideous, I tried to take in as much information as I could before the Calvados booted her up and she started asking questions. I could see her face 3 times in that room, once in a silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece, with her in Ray-Bans, dangling from a ski lift, once in a huge and terrible oil portrait done by someone who can't have liked her all that much, hanging by the window, and finally and definitely, the best of all, in a sofa 10 feet away. She couldn't have been more than 19, with square shoulders and long brown hair that waved and cheered as it disappeared behind her neck. The high, round neck bones implied orientalness, but that disappeared as soon as you reached her eyes, which were also round and large and bright grey, if that makes any sense. She was wearing a red silk dressing gown and one elegant slipper with fancy gold thread across the toes. I glanced round the room, but its mate was nowhere to be seen. Maybe she could only afford one. She cleared some husk from her throat. "Who is he?" she said. "I think I'd known she was going to be American before she opened her mouth. Too healthy to be anything else. And where do they get those teeth?" "His name is Rainer," I said, and then realized that this sounded a little thin as an answer, so I thought I'd add something. "He was a very dangerous man." "Dangerous?" She looked worried by that, and quite right too. It was probably crossing her mind as it was crossing mine that if Rainer was dangerous and I'd killed him, then that, hierarchically speaking, made me very dangerous. "Dangerous," I said again, and watched her closely as she looked away. She seemed to be trembling less, which was good. Or maybe trembling had just fallen into sync with mine, so I noticed it less. "Well, what is he doing here?" she said at last. What did he want?" "It's difficult to say, difficult for me at any rate. Maybe he was after money, maybe the silver." "You mean he didn't tell you?" Her voice was suddenly loud. "You hit this guy without knowing who he was? What he was going to do here?" Despite the shock, her brain seemed to be coming along pretty nicely. "I hit him because he was trying to kill me," I said. I'm like that." I tried a roguish smile, then caught sight of it in the mirror over the mantelpiece and realized it hadn't worked. "You're like that," she repeated unlovingly. "And who are you?" Well, now, I was going to have to wear some very soft shoes at this juncture. This was where things could suddenly get a lot worse than they already were. I tried looking surprised and perhaps just a little bit hurt. You mean you don't recognize me? No. Ha, odd. Fincham, James Fincham. I held out my hand. She didn't take it, so I converted the movement into a nonchalant brush of the hair. That's a name, she said. That's not who you are. I'm a friend of your father's. She considered this for a moment. Business friend? Well, sort of. Sort of, she nodded. You're James Fincham. You're a sort of a business friend of my father's, and you've just killed a man in our house. I put my hand on one side and tried to show that, yes, sometimes it's an absolute bugger of a world. She showed her teeth again. And that's it. Is it? That's your CV? I reprised, the roguish smile to no better effect. Wait a second, she said. She looked at Reiner, then suddenly sat up a little straighter, as if a thought had just struck her. You didn't call anybody, did you? Come to think of it, all things considered, she must have been nearer 24. You mean I was floundering now? I mean, she said, there's no ambulance coming here. Jesus. She put the glass down on the carpet by her feet, got up and walked towards the phone.